Become a sustaining member of the Commonwealth Club for just $10 a month. Join today.
My name is Dr. Mary Ann Dewan, and I am the Santa Clara County Superintendent of Schools. I serve as a co-chair for Silicon Valley Reads. Silicon Valley Reads is a county-wide community engagement initiative in partnership with the Santa Clara County Library District and San Jose Library that aims to unite the community of Santa Clara County through the joy of reading. This is the 18th year of Silicon Valley Reads, and our theme is Connecting. While the pandemic has forced us to keep physical distance from one another, this year's theme allows us to connect virtually, not only through a love of books and reading, but through cooking, the arts, nature, and more. For more information about the 2021 titles and events, please visit www.siliconvalleyreads.org. I would like to take this opportunity to thank today's moderator, Sal Pizarro. Sal has written the Around Town column for the San Jose Mercury News since 2005. His column covers the people and events surrounding the cultural scene in Silicon Valley. Now, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce the Cupertino High School a cappella choir under the direction of Andrew Aaron.
Jeremiah was a bullfrog, was a good friend of mine. I never rushed to see a murky step, but I always had a good time. And we always had a lot of fun times. Joy to the world now. All the boys and girls now. Joy to the fishes in the deep blue sea. Joy to you and me. If I were the king of the world, I'd tell you what I'd do. I'd throw away the cars and the bars and the wars and spend my time with you. Joy to the world now. All the boys and girls now. Joy to the fishes in the deep blue sea. Joy to you and me.
Oh, I love the ladies. I love to have my fun. I'm a high night flyer and a rainbow rider and a straight shooting son of a gun. I said a straight shooting son of a gun.
Joy to the fishes in the deep blue sea. Joy to you and me. Joy to the world. All the boys and girls. Joy to the fishes in the deep blue sea. Joy to you and me. Joy to you and
Welcome to this year's edition of Silicon Valley Reads. Thank you for being here, and thank you to the Cupertino Choir for that wonderful song. We are indeed at a time when the world needs all the joy that it can get. As Dr. Dewan said, my name's Sal Pizarro, and I'm the Around Town columnist for the Mercury News. In a normal year, we'd be sitting together right now at the De Anza College Performing Arts Center, but as we all know, this is no normal year. And that ties into this year's Silicon Valley Reads theme, Connecting. Tonight, our conversation will be using as its springboard Dr. Vivek Murthy's book, Together, The Healing Power of Human Connection in a Sometimes Lonely World. I don't know if you've had a chance to read it yet, but even if you haven't, I think you'll really enjoy tonight's conversation. Now, unfortunately, Dr. Murthy, who served as Surgeon General under President Obama, and is President Joe Biden's nominee to return to the post, couldn't join us this evening. He's a busy guy right now. but we will be hearing from him in recorded messages later in our program. Instead, we'll have a panel discussing these themes, and I don't think you'll be disappointed. Let me tell you a little bit about our guest tonight, who you can see on the screen. First, we have Dr. Sarah Cody, a familiar face to so many of us here in Santa Clara County. Dr. Cody joined the County of Santa Clara's Public Health Department 20 years ago and currently serves as its director and the county health officer. She oversees a staff of 450 people who lead more than 30 programs dedicated to providing services that prevent disease and promote health and equity. And as we've all learned over the past year, she also assesses and reports on community health and works on policy and strategic planning. A native of Santa Clara County, she graduated from Stanford University and Yale Medical School before returning to the Bay Area to do her residency at Stanford Hospital. Before joining the county, she completed a postdoctoral fellowship as an epidemic intelligence service officer with the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. Sounds like kind of like a spy for diseases, but I think that's worked out in our benefit. We also have Dr. James Doty. So we have Dr. Cody and Dr. Doty. Dr. Doty is a neurosurgeon who has spent the past 20 years at Stanford on and off, plus a period as an entrepreneur during which he took Accuray, manufacturer of the CyberKnife, public. Too bad it's not GameStop. It might be doing great right now. But the important part of his work for our purposes is that he founded the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education at Stanford. Dr. Doty has studied compassion, empathy, and altruism over the past 12 years, and he's spoken around the world promoting the value proposition of incorporating both compassion and self-compassion into one's life. He's also the best-selling author of Into the Magic Shop, a neurosurgeon's quest to discover the mysteries of the brain and the secrets of the heart. And here's a true fact you probably didn't know. The popular K-pop band BTS used Dr. Doty's book as the basis for their third album, in which a song appears called The Magic Shop. And finally, we have Usha Srinivasan. She's the founder and president of Mosaic America, formerly known as Sangam Arts. It's a Silicon Valley nonprofit whose mission is to move American communities like ours from a state of just diversity to one of belonging through creative engagement. A classical Indian dancer, Usha has served on the City of Santa Clara's Cultural Commission and on the board of World Arts West, the producer of the San Francisco Ethnic Dance Festival. She's an alumna of the Multicultural Arts Leadership Institute and was selected by the Knight Foundation as a Creative Community Fellow in 2016. Now, prior to founding Sangam Arts, Usha worked in the high-tech industry for nearly 15 years and holds an electrical degree in electrical engineering. She's also an ace solver of cryptic crosswords and a big fan of British mysteries. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Dr. Murthy can't be with us, but we're going to hear from him right now in a few clips from an interview he did with the Commonwealth Club in May. Let's listen to those clips.
When we focus on social connection, it turns out that that is extraordinary potential to transform our experience of life. And I found in the writing of this book and in researching and talking to people about their stories, that while we've had social connection around for millennia, we've largely left it on the table in the modern age as a powerful resource that needs to be cultivated and prioritized and paid attention to. I found that service is a powerful antidote to loneliness. And the reason is because when we're lonely, we actually experience an elevation in threat level. And because we feel threatened and unsafe, our focus shifts inward toward ourselves. And as it lasts for a long time, loneliness can also erode our self-esteem, and we come to believe we're lonely because we're not likable. And this actually contributes to this downward spiral where loneliness begets more loneliness. But service is powerful because it breaks that cycle. It shifts the focus from ourselves to someone else, but it also reaffirms for us that we have value to bring to the world. We are all struggling with something. COVID-19 has turned our lives upside down. It's created extraordinary hardship in many people's lives. but it's changed all of our lives. And even though we may be in different boats, we're in the same storm. And that gives us an opportunity to reach out to other people, to ask how they're doing, and to see how we can help.
And that's a great point, that we are all in the same storm together. So next, I'd like to bring up our first panelist, who's Dr. Sarah Cody, who I previously introduced, the Public Health Officer for Santa Clara County. Dr. Cody, the floor is yours to talk about the pandemic and how we're getting through this together.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, and particularly with such distinguished panelists. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the pandemic and how I've experienced it, and I think some things that I have learned. I just want to acknowledge it's been an extraordinary year in many ways. It's been extraordinarily difficult, but I think we've also learned things that we never thought that we would. And that a year in, each of us are experiencing a certain degree of fatigue and need to think about how do we fill and restore our buckets, our emotional buckets, and what does that? Because certainly a year of the pandemic can make some of us feel a little low on those reserves. So first and foremost, I remember distinctly it was about a half a year ago, we were in the Emergency Operations Center, and we were watching our numbers climb again, and much of our county was still closed. And we're hearing from so many people in the community who had just been struggling for so long. And I remember, many of my friends were really tired of being at home in difficult circumstances. And that's when I realized that being able to serve and having agency to make a difference, how grateful I was to have that feeling. And how nourishing that feeling is for so many of us, and that any little thing that you do that gives you agency and you understand how you're contributing to the greater whole, that in and of itself can really fill your reserve. And I've seen it in ways large and small, even things like grandchildren going grocery shopping for their grandparents and helping in that way. Neighbors coming together, each doing something that the other might not be able to do. And of course, the hundreds of thousands of people who have volunteered in so many ways during the pandemic. So I think out of that, what I've seen, the bright spots that have come up, one is incredible resilience. People have kept at it, staying at home, wearing their masks, getting by, being creative, month in, month out, with phenomenal resiliency. And part of that, I think, is also a creativity in adapting and doing things completely differently than anyone had ever done it before. And I think chief among those is all of us learning how to use technology, learning how to connect over Zoom or Teams or any of the other modalities that I'd never used until a year ago. And one of the things that I've noticed is that now that we have this permission to connect virtually and not have to be together in order to have an interchange, it actually strangely has opened up many new opportunities. I imagine many of you have experienced that. There are people from way, way, way in your past who have reached out or organized a reunion online. I know I've heard from everyone from a best friend in first grade that I haven't heard from in 30 years, to college friends, to some friends who are more recent, but who I'd been out of touch with. So there's been a lot of, ironically, a lot of reconnecting during the last year and during the pandemic. I even know of some friends who cook together or who meet every Friday evening to unwind and chat and talk about the week. And I think that this is the way that we're going to be for a while, and it's the way that we're going to be able to move forward. After an extraordinarily difficult year, having a vaccine available has been a beacon of light, something that makes me feel a bit more relaxed. At the same time, it's also difficult to share that while we have a vaccine, all those things that we've been doing for the last year, we actually need to keep doing, and we're not even quite sure how long that's going to be. So I think that things will ease. But in some ways, we have to continue to wear our masks and to meet over Zoom or other modalities whenever we can. So it's been an extraordinary year. I know everyone is quite hungry for our old life, and to some extent, we've all gone through many different stages of grief, from anger to denial and acceptance, and sometimes channeling through all those feelings more than once. But through it, I think that we also have, each of us individually and as communities, in many ways, become stronger. And I hope that the strength that we've found will carry us forward into the next chapter and through whatever whatever challenges we may face going forward. So happy to answer questions, of course. Very eager to hear from the other panelists. And thank you again so much for inviting me to join you this evening. Back to you, Sal.
Thank you, Dr. Cody. And there will be opportunities for the audience to ask questions. I think you can do that through the chat, and then following our panel discussion and the questions I ask, I'll be able to ask some audience questions. But now we're going to see 2 more clips from Dr. Morthy talking about how we connect best with other people and a little bit about love. So let's roll those clips.
And one of the things I realized through so many of the amazing people I met along the way was that our ability to connect with other people is really grounded in our ability to connect deeply with ourselves. And what does it mean to be connected with yourself? Well, it means to accept yourself, to know that you have value and you have self-worth. It means to be grounded and to be centered. It means to be at peace. When we approach other people, from a place of centeredness, when we know our worth, when we walk into a conversation, we actually get more out of those interactions because we're not trying to be somebody else. But the reality is that our worth as a human beings is much more intrinsic. It's not determined by the size of our bank account. It's actually determined by our intrinsic ability to give and receive love. That's what determines our worth as a human being.
So as we introduced Dr. Doty to talk to us, I thought it was interesting. Dr. Morthy talked about this emotional spiral people go to and how service can be a coping mechanism or an antidote. And so now we're going to hear from someone who's an expert on how we cope and how we deal with these kind of things. Dr. Doty, the floor is yours.
Yes. In some ways, I want to talk about love, but let me tell you a very quick story about my own self and the journey that resulted in me being with you today. Because for many of us, who we are today is a manifestation of our past. And my own past was that I was a child of an alcoholic and a mother who was an invalid who had a stroke when I was a child and was chronically depressed. In fact, she attempted suicide. Neither of my parents had gone to college, and we actually were quite poor. And I grew up as a child who was very frightened, afraid, filled with despair, anger, hostility. And the way this connects to us today is that at the age of 12, I actually walked into a magic shop and met a woman by the name of Ruth. And for those of you who are interested, that's actually in the book that Sal was kind enough to mention. But the point of this is that what happened to me was that I was always afraid and anxious. And in some ways, this is what the pandemic has caused for many people, the sense of isolation, the sense of loneliness, the sense of not having a future, perhaps. And this woman in the magic shop taught me a number of things. And interestingly, many related to Eastern religious practices. So the thing she taught me was, first of all, that one of the things that causes stress and anxiety and fear is not accepting. And what I mean by that is many people create their own anxiety and fear because they won't accept the present, what's happening to them. They want something that's really not available to them. They want a different future. And this has been a real problem with the pandemic. Prior to the pandemic, certainly, there was an epidemic of stress, anxiety, and depression. And with the epidemic, because of isolation and loneliness, this unfortunately has been exacerbated. So one of the things is to accept that there is a pandemic, that there are certain requirements as a result of that pandemic, and not keep resisting that reality and accepting it. So that's one of the tools that an individual can use to be more present, because you're not thinking about the past. As Dr. Murthy also noted, we are social animals. We thrive with connection. And when we're isolated from other people, oftentimes this leads to self-rumination. And unfortunately, this is also just the nature of humans in general. Oftentimes we'll say, geez, the reason I'm lonely is because people don't like me, or I'm not good enough, or I'm not smart enough. And as a result, we beat ourselves up a lot of the time. In fact, many people are more critical of themselves than they are of anyone else. And this spirals out of control, where your focus actually is a negative dialogue with yourself. And as a result, this exacerbates every feeling that you have. But what is the cure for that? Well, the first thing is to accept yourself and understand that the negative dialogue that you have is actually a false narrative. As humans, we oftentimes hear negative commentary and we turn to that. And as a side effect of that, we create this narrative of negative comments about ourselves, because that's what, if you will, sticks to us. So one of the first things you have to do is understand that that narrative's not true, and then convert these negative comments to positive comments of self-affirmation, kindness, love for yourself, and a feeling that, in fact, you're worthy. Because you see, when you beat yourself up so much, when you're inwardly looking, this separates you. You're not able to live in the present. But what we know is the present is what is necessary to have true connection with another individual. And part of that connection means not only being kind to yourself, but being authentic, which is oftentimes very difficult with the stresses and strains of us or on us in this modern world. Because you have to remember, our DNA has not changed in the last 200,000 years. So we're the same as we were on the savannah in Africa. But unfortunately, evolution does not change that quickly. And the same mechanics that put us in that position, or the baggage from evolution that allowed us to survive wonderfully in that environment, isn't with us today. And as a result, we often overreact, we get anxious, we get fearful. So first of all, being kind to yourself. Second of all, being authentic. And what I mean by that is, in the modern world, so many people try to present themselves based on credentials, their position, their power, their social connection. And unfortunately, though, that is not something that truly connects you with people. Because until you can truly say, as an example, I'm suffering, I need help, then it doesn't work. You can't connect. So when you're vulnerable, when you're authentic, this is one of the most important parts of true connection. And as Dr. Murthy said, true connection also is an outward journey. Because again, when you reach out, you are of service, then interestingly enough, when you are compassionate, when you're being of service to others, it has a huge, huge positive physiologic effect on you. In fact, when you're inwardly focused and you're hypercritical, it has negative effects. So in that context, what happens is your blood pressure goes up, your heart rate goes up, your immune system is suppressed, you have the release of inflammatory proteins, you have the release of stress hormones, which on a chronic basis are very deleterious to our health. But when you're being of service, when you're out, this has the opposite effect. In fact, being compassionate, being kind, being of service has more positive effect, actually, than being at your ideal body weight or doing exercise. Now, I certainly don't recommend not doing exercise and not being at your ideal body weight. But my point is, this is the power of compassion, of being of service. And many people, when they hear the term compassion, they think it's soft and squishy and allows people to walk over you. But the reality is, it's just the opposite. And in fact, what happens is that when you're truly authentic, when you're truly vulnerable, when you are of service, when you're generous, this actually improves the entire environment around you. So to be happy, this requires you to be kind to yourself. It requires you to care for others. It requires you to be of service. It requires you not to be afraid, but to be accepting. It requires you to be vulnerable. It requires you to be authentic. When you're able to do that, even in the face of this pandemic, it will have huge, huge positive effects.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Doty. And I think we're going to now run another clip from Dr. Murthy.
Because while there is the threat of a social recession with COVID-19, there's also the opportunity for us to step back now and ask ourselves, where do relationships and people fall in our priority list? How do we want to build a people-centered life going forward?
Okay, so now we heard about a people-centered life. And that sounds like something that connects right to our next speaker, Usha Srinivasan. So I think she's going to come on now and talk a little bit to us about how we connect as people and culturally. We've heard about mental health and physical health, but now I think we want to hear a little bit about cultural health and how we work together as a community. Usha?
Thank you, Sal, and thank you to the Commonwealth Club and to Silicon Valley Reads for this amazing opportunity. We just heard from Dr. Doty and also Dr. Sarah Cody earlier about the importance of interpersonal connections, even during these times of COVID, in maintaining our physical and emotional health and well-being as individuals. What I'd like to talk a little bit about is the nature, the quality, the extent and depth of these relationships and connections, and the impact they have on the health and vibrancy of the community at large. Even before COVID hit us, I think most of us who've lived here for a while in Silicon Valley have experienced a certain social malaise that perhaps we never articulated, but we felt. There's something missing. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that over the past 2 or 3 decades, we have seen tremendous demographic changes that would normally happen in places over centuries have happened in a matter of 3 to 4 decades. When I first came here to Silicon Valley to attend Stanford, in 95, we were still about 70% white, 65 to 70% white. Fast forward today, we are a majority minority community with no race or ethnic group making up more than a third of our population. That is tremendous amount of change that has happened in a very short period of time. Also, partly because of the shift from agricultural economy to a booming technology hub, we've seen tremendous migration from not just people from other countries, but also from all over the US. In fact, as of 2018, Santa Clara County had about 38.5% of the residents here who were born in other places. In fact, only about 30% of those who live here actually are native to even California. So we have a large proportion of our population that has no roots to this community over here. They don't have a shared history. And then in a related trend, we actually have people that have perhaps lived here for decades that because of the cost of living or because their children can no longer afford to be here, don't foresee themselves living here in the next 10 to 20 years. So let's think about that. So we have very tenuous connections to our history of this land. We don't have shared experiences of events that form the basis for a feeling of community. We don't see ourselves having a shared future. And more importantly, we don't have those authentic connections between people in communities on a sustained, repeated basis. What has happened is we find ourselves living in cultural silos. We all see that. I see that in my community as an Indian American. And it's true for many other immigrant communities. The fact that we may work and transact with a variety of people, but at the end of the day, we go back to kind of living, eating, praying, playing with people that are most like us. And that has resulted, I believe, in a certain fraying of the social fabric or the connective tissue that is the basis of a healthy community. We all kind of live in our little cultural silos as hyphenated Americans, some of us feeling more American than others. But all of this, I think we can understand without even the research to support it, is really, it represents a social dysfunction. And more importantly, it represents the failure to realize the true potential of America. And so what do we do about this? Why does this happen? It is my belief that this has to do not just with the rapid pace at which the changes happen, but also with a flawed model of social integration and connection that we have come to rely on in America. So we always talk about how America is a melting pot. When you think about that, what does that mean? It means that people can come here from many different places and in this crucible of democracy and freedom, just become American, indistinguishable from each other. Well, we all know for a fact that that model didn't even suit and apply to our African-American and indigenous brothers and sisters. And it most certainly does not hold true anymore when vast majority of immigrants come from places like Latin America and Asia, people like me. People who, even if we decided to give up eating curry and change the names of our kids, would still be asked, where are you really from? So where does that leave us? What do we do? Well, I believe that we have a great opportunity to really redefine what it means to be American, to create what Dr. Doty calls these authentic connections, to bring our whole person to every interaction. Because we all have a nuanced understanding of our own communities and cultures, but we have a very monolithic and stereotypical understanding of others. What we need to do is to come together as a mosaic. Much like the tiles of a mosaic are beautiful and glorious on their own and valuable on their own, but it is the picture that they create together that is even more glorious. We need to develop a certain cultural competency and openness, a willingness to be vulnerable, willingness to come proudly as we are and come together bound by American values, not only to show off our diversity, but kind of identify the common threads that bind us. And that is what we need to do. And I believe, and this is a shameless plug for my organization at Mosaic America, we believe that this can be accomplished through arts, through intercultural arts. When you bring together artists and culture bearers who can be great ambassadors for their own cultures, when they come together in a manner that is open-hearted, curious, when they co-create and collaborate and present works in a way that draws a diverse audience, we can all realize the true potential and strengthen our community and move it from merely being diverse to being a community in which everybody feels like they belong. With that, I'm going to turn back to Sal.
And thank you, Usha. I love to be part of that world where everyone feels as though they belong. I think we're lacking that in so many ways now. But now at this time, I'd like to invite our other two panelists to turn their cameras back on, and we're going to have a bit of a group discussion. I'll be directing some questions at you individually, but I'll have a few that I hope we can all answer, except me. I don't answer questions. I just ask them. That's it's in the job description. But first, and I'm going to start with Dr. Cody. But before I do want to mention that I know a lot of our audience probably has a lot of questions for you that are related to what's going on with COVID-19 in the county and health orders, and that we want to stay on topic tonight. And so I'd really encourage them to keep the questions about connectiveness and being together. And for information on the pandemic right now, the best place to go, I believe, is still the county website, sccgov.org. And all the up-to-date information is there. And really, the dashboards will tell you everything you need to know. You can read all the current information. So I encourage you to go there. But going back to what you spoke of, Dr. Cody, you mentioned the fatigue and how people are having to sort of refill their emotional buckets. And I wanted to start with you and ask, how have you been filling your emotional bucket? Because you've been on the front lines of this thing for basically a year, and you've seen so much and been handling so much. How do you keep yourself, your emotional bucket filled? And the other two of you can think about how you're going to answer that.
Well, it's a good question, and I will be the first to acknowledge that I'm not. I struggle too. My emotional bucket runs dry too, so I've not perfected this by any means. I can tell you about what I have experienced actually is my colleagues at the county, which one of the wonderful things, well, I love our county government. I'm just going to come clean. And one of the many things that I love about our county government is that there are people from every different community in the county who work for the county. And so in some ways, we do have the opportunity to have a very interconnected and diverse community just among county colleagues, which is really lovely. And this has certainly been the case in the Emergency Operations Center. So a group of us have been sort of like, hunkered down in a bunker together for almost a year, some moving in and some moving out. And that's really, I would say, where I fill my emotional bucket. And I think it's interesting, in a sort of the dynamic of the group is we take turns feeling really energetic and really positive and able to lead, and then feeling, worn out and tired and a little bit discouraged. But there's always somebody who's feeling really energetic and can kind of lift the others. And it's kind of a natural cycle that's occurred. I don't know if my colleagues on the call probably thought more about this and studied this, but this is just kind of how I've experienced being in the bunker with my colleagues. I also, of course, I am a native of Santa Clara County and multi-generational Californian, and so I have deep roots here. And many family and friends who also sort of help me.
Great. Dr. Doty, how are you filling your bucket?
Well, in some ways, it actually has to do with my family. I'm a neurosurgeon most of the time, and because of the pandemic, my elective practice is markedly decreased. So frankly, I get to spend a lot more time at home, which is typically unusual. So I have 2 children at home, and so I hang out with them and my wife and certainly enjoy that. And the other thing I was talking about acceptance. And I think the nature of resiliency is that you're able to adapt. So I had no regrets about the past. Well, certainly I had some, but my point is I didn't hang on to that as that's the most important thing. I looked forward and have accepted the limitations that I'm under, so I don't create a lot of angst about the situation being different. And I think that's very, very important. And then, of course, there are a small number of friends that in a socially distanced way that I have interacted with, which is wonderful. And in some ways, that ends up being the people typically you're closest to, or the friends you're closest to. And the other is, although it seemed strange at first, this idea of using Zoom or Skype or other techniques to connect with people, while it's not necessarily ideal, it certainly has served as a source of connecting, exchanging ideas, and I'll say virtually being with somebody. And while it's not perfect, I think that is helpful as well.
And Usha?
Thank you, Sal. For me, I'm blessed in so many ways. You know, in my household, my parents live with me, my aged parents and my young kids. I have a lovely dachshund and of course my husband, and so it's a full house. But I have cultivated a gratitude practice that really helps me kind of tide over the bad parts, and there's plenty of that. You know, I'm so grateful for the fact that my elderly parents are with me and I can care for them and tend to their needs here rather than worrying about them from afar, which a lot of my friends who have parents in India or elsewhere, they experience. I'm also grateful for the fact that my kids have all the resources they have. So that is one aspect I'm constantly reminding myself. So that helps. Also, the arts, you know, I think in times like these, especially given the work that I do, which is about bringing artists from different cultures and providing them with the resources they need, especially in this time, to collaborate, co-create, and present works that highlight our commonalities, but also celebrate our glorious diversity. That is very nourishing to me. And, you know, I have a wonderful team that works on these projects with me, and I'm grateful for that. So finding purpose in everything you do, and at the end of the day, having a wonderful family that nurtures you, that accepts you as you are with all your flaws, has been a blessing. And I rely on that a lot.
I think we all are relying on family and other things like that to just keep us together. Now, Usha, when you were talking, you were talking about how we live in siloed communities, and I never really thought about the hyphen, yes. Which, you know, when we think about being Mexican American as I am, or others are Asian American, African American, Indo American, you know, the hyphen was supposed to be simply connected the two cultures, but you're right, in many ways it's creating a separation now.
Yes.
How do we get past these siloed communities going forward when the pandemic hopefully is over and we can come together again? How does that work?
So it's my understanding and my belief that, again, you know, arts and humanities offer great vehicles for these kind of dialogues. You know, certainly we all live as hyphenated communities on the edges, hoping that somehow, someday we will become American. Well, we know that that's, you know, either we have to wait a very long time, so we're all beige Americans, or we can rethink the way we define what it means to be American. And there are no easy answers. Like I said, what we have gone through in terms of demographic shifts here in Santa Clara County is what a place like India went through over centuries of colonization, invasion, settling. So populations there had tremendous amount of time to adjust and come up with a new stasis or equilibrium, right? We have to accelerate that process of becoming more culturally competent, of being kind of redefining in our minds, questioning everything we say and do, and kind of accepting that we are all American, that being American doesn't require you to look a certain way or pray to a certain God or eat certain things. What makes us American is our shared values, love for country, our love for freedom, liberty, and all the beautiful things that America stands for. And I think what we need to do is to be very deliberate. We certainly do programming that encourages this kind of intercultural performances and opportunities for people to get together. But we need to all make sure that we are bringing our authentic selves to every interaction we have, whether it's at work, whether it's with our neighbors. We are not kind of, forcing ourselves to switch. Like I remember when I first got out of business school and started to work, I didn't show up in my glorious Indian Americanness, right? I showed up as a high-tech product manager, even though you look around the room and we were all very, very diverse. We looked like we stepped out of a Getty's image, stock image, but we didn't bring that diversity to our conversations. So maybe some of that is fear of rejection. You just don't want to offend anybody. You don't want to make anyone feel out of place. But I think it's time for us at this point and stage for all of us to show up authentically. And on the flip side, for us to also accept, we don't need to know everything about other cultures. We just need to know that it's okay to be different and acknowledge that there is value in every one of us, in our cultures. We all come with a lot of wonderful history and cultural heritage. Let's all come together into this mosaic. And I think I personally believe art's consistent, systematic opportunities for interaction that is based on mutual respect, trust, and love and openness is the way to go.
And I'm hearing you used Dr. Doty's word again. It's
Yes.
officially your word, authentic.
Yes.
Our authentic selves. Now, we're all in our, we're hunkered down. We're in our bunkers, our various bunkers, and it's very easy to lose that authentic self. Dr. Doty, what are the barriers to being an authentic person, and how do we get past that?
Well, I think what's been commented on actually is, frankly, fear of judgment. And this is something that's probably one of the most profound things that so many of us carry, because it's this feeling that we're not worthy, or that an action we do is going to be judged in a negative fashion. And this is actually where the issue of self-compassion comes in, because everybody deserves love. They are worthy, and everyone can make a contribution. We were talking about silos a little bit. One of the other challenges for all of us is that people thrive in an environment of psychological safety. Again, what this means is not being judged, being accepted for who you are. And unfortunately, when we're afraid or anxious, we have a tendency to isolate ourselves with people who look like us, act like us, because that's where we feel most comfortable. And so that, on some level, it actually also serves as a separator of us, if you will, from the other. So I think the challenge for us, and it's probably the greatest challenge, is to look at the other as yourself. When you are able to accomplish that task, making the right decision, connecting with another person, frankly, becomes easy, because you act in some ways in your own self-interest. When you truly believe that the other is you, and how you treat the other is a reflection of you, and in some ways you're rewarded for that, then everything starts changing. And the reason the golden rule has been around for millennia is because it's a fact. And in fact, many of the spiritual, while they may have overtones of religious dogma, the reason they're so powerful is at the base of every one of them is compassion, caring, and love. And our challenge is to take that and understand how we limit that, and then to go forward and embrace everyone. And it is indeed a challenge, but the rewards are so high, it's an extraordinary opportunity. But this is one of the problems we have in America today, this disparity, and people feel they're left out, or they're not being rewarded, or they're being judged. And again, fear, anxiety is what separates people, and actually what results in a lot of people looking for a savior or someone to step in and make it all better. But the thing that makes it truly better is being kind and compassionate, in my opinion.
Thank you. Now, I want to bring it back to Dr. Murthy's book a little. In his book, he discusses how loneliness can lead not only to emotional issues, emotional health issues, but physical health issues for people. And I wanted to ask Dr. Cody, given the way the entire country really has been cut off and feeling very lonely because of the pandemic, is that something we're going to have to watch out for as a community, the physical effects of this loneliness in the coming year and the year after that? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that in many ways, we're going to have a very, very long recovery period. And we need to acknowledge that and accept that, because the whole year since the pandemic started has been about extraordinarily difficult trade-offs between two or three or multiple really not good choices. And that has been very hard to understand and very hard to communicate. But the truth is that since, for the most part, we have been isolating away from each other, many in the community have experienced a significant loss. Not just loss of someone dying of COVID, but loneliness and so many other health conditions. And I'm frequently asked, Dr. Cody, don't you care about anything other than COVID? Of course I do. And of course we all do. And the truth is that I think that we will have a period of time of recovery where we will see probably increases in people's mental health really needs quite a bit of care and attention. I don't know anyone who hasn't suffered themselves or know someone close who's struggled with their mental health. And you're absolutely right. Your mental health and your physical health are really all interconnected. So I think people may experience their mental health with physical ills, and maybe vice versa. So I think just as far as going back to acceptance, to accept that we have all been through something and are still going through something extraordinarily difficult, and there's going to be a fairly lengthy healing process, I think.
So, I think you're right that we have been going through something really difficult, and it's been amazing to watch people cope in their own ways. I've seen from early on in the pandemic, people dancing on their front porches, other people banging pots and pans to thank healthcare workers. Some of those things are still going on in neighborhoods all around our community. And it's really been inspiring in my job as a columnist, to hear from people who let me know what their communities are doing to keep each other afloat, even while they're being social distanced and safe. And I wanted to know, what things have you three actually seen, or examples you have of people connecting despite the barriers we have? I know, Dr. Cody, you mentioned some of them in terms of people you've heard from in your past who've connected with you technologically, I suppose. But Dr. Doty, Usha, what have you guys seen with people connecting?
It's interesting. One thing that I think that I've noticed is, I don't know how many of the listeners have something called Nextdoor, which is sort of a community communication. And what I've seen is that people ask for something, and there are tons of people to give. And it's even my own son ask people in the neighborhood if older or elderly people or people who couldn't get out, if they wanted their lawn mowed, as an example. But doing these acts for another person, going up, picking up groceries, things like this, within that network, because it's very close to you, it's around you, I think is very, very helpful. And again, I think that the most important thing to emphasize is, while you may feel like you're suffering, and this gets back to Usha's point and Dr. Cody's, is that everyone is suffering. And sometimes we get caught up in our own narrative. And this is the importance of self-compassion, but it's also recognizing that others are suffering. And, frankly, sometimes simply a smile or doing a very small act of kindness can completely change an individual's life, and you don't even realize it. And certainly this idea of gratitude is incredibly important. There are so many people who are unemployed, who have difficulty with food security, who have children who are stuck in small spaces. I mean, this is very, very challenging for some. So when you look at yourself, almost regardless of your circumstance, even in my job as a neurosurgeon, I can assure you, no matter how bad you think you have it, there are many, many people who have it much worse. And that's just a reminder to be present to the suffering of others, but also motivate you to make an effort to be kind to others, because you have no idea what another is suffering when you interact with them necessarily.
Usha, in what ways have you seen people connecting?
So during COVID, I feel like a lot of the people that were on this ever increasing, this treadmill that was just forever going at a faster and faster pace, right? Where we get caught up in just doing without really thinking about why we're doing it. And at some point, when I'm working out, for example, if I'm going too fast, I can't, find the controls. I'm afraid I'm going to fall flat on my face. It's disorienting, but you still keep doing it. What I found is that COVID, to some extent, has forced us to slow down, simply because you no longer have this fear of missing out. You allow this permission to not do things that you always did. And that, I think, has allowed a lot of people to kind of go back to really re-examine. I've done this myself for the organization as well as me personally, kind of really go inward a little bit and take this unique opportunity, which is probably, hopefully, just once in a lifetime, to give ourselves permission to introspect, to find to figure out, first of all, are we in alignment? A lot of times the momentum carries us so far afield from our values, from what we would like to think we are about, kind of bring us back into alignment and make sure that the activities we indulge in going forward continue to be kind of aligned with our core values. The other thing that I found is just the sheer ingenuity of people, the things that they're able to come up with, when they are faced with these really, really bad, dire circumstances. You've seen arts cooperatives come together in ways to kind of support each other, to allow people to find ways to make a living. The School of Arts and Culture, for example, in San Jose at the Mexican Heritage Plaza, they were largely a culture and arts-based or community organization. They've pivoted literally in the face of pandemic to becoming a community resource, offering COVID tests, COVID vaccines now, food distribution. So I feel like the pandemic has really forced us to some extent to go back to our first order needs, think about what is important, but also try to get back into realignment. And a lot of people may never go back to working the way they did before. Hopefully, some of this perspective hopefully will last and hopefully will help us streamline our activities and our priorities. So I'm seeing some of that.
Well, pivot has been one of the big words of the past year, and it's amazing to see communities pivot that way so that they're working together. I don't know if you have any other examples you'd like to share, Dr. Cody, or if we want to go on to the next question.
Well, I've certainly seen the same things, incredible ability of people to adapt. Things change and people adapt. and find a way. I mean, myriad examples, large and small, and that has been really heartening and very inspiring to watch.
Great. Well, now I'm going to go on to some questions we've gotten from the audience. The first one is, I think probably Dr. Cody, you might be the best person to answer that, but Usha or Dr. Doty, if you have answers, you may also want to say them. For people who are feeling isolated or lonely, are there resources available for them through the county or things that they can do themselves to help deal with that?
There are resources through the county, through the behavioral health program. I think they're generally for people who are experiencing more severe forms of loneliness. But I would love to turn to my colleagues on the call for, I think there's probably more simple and straightforward ways that people can manage feeling isolated and feeling lonely.
Well, certainly, I think, frankly, just being out in nature, if you have the ability to go out in nature, has a very, very powerful influence, as well as what we've discussed is finding an opportunity to be of service. And then there are actually some technologies that are available. There's some chatbots that actually use artificial intelligence to interact with you. There's something called Talkspace and other platforms for mental health issues to connect actually with a therapist. So there are some resources available. And again, there are even some platforms that allow you simply to just connect with another person. It's not necessarily therapeutic per se, except for the fact that connecting with another person is highly therapeutic, and especially somebody who you can identify in the sense that they're in the same boat as you and struggling. Because when you share with another person your struggles in an authentic fashion, and they conversely share with you, it actually is extraordinarily powerful. In fact, there's an app called Pure, P-U-U-R, which is a dyadic meditation app. And amazingly, it is even stronger than mindfulness or other meditation practices because of the nature of that connection. You don't even need to know the person's name, actually. You can just connect with them. And I think that can be also extraordinarily powerful. So there are some technologies that are available now that allow people to connect with just another person, or potentially a mechanism whereby they have an expertise in the mental health space.
Great. Poor. I'm going to have to remember that. Usha, do you have any?
Yeah, I think both Dr. Cody and Dr. Doty have provided some useful inputs. What I would say is, we all talk a lot about how social media, for example, people tend not to be authentic on social media. Just show up there, you put on the best, you present a part of yourself that you think other people will admire and accept. But I've also seen more recently on Twitter, for example, a couple of examples of people feeling despondent, people that lost a spouse or a parent to COVID, and they just kind of post and say, I need help. I'm feeling bad. I'm feeling terrible. But if you can find it in yourself to be honest and vulnerable, you'll be amazed at how this social media that can be so fraught and negative sometimes can also kind of embrace you in a way that lifts you up. So I think asking for help is the first step. And, and of course, then there's all those other resources that Dr. Doty and Dr. Cody talked about.
Okay, we're getting close to wrapping up. We're not quite there yet. So I'm going to start going through some of these questions a little quicker. The first one's actually really personal for you guys. Well, actually for two of you, for Usha and Dr. Doty. We have a question from the audience asking, can you tell us a little bit about the artwork behind you? This is one of the things about being on Zoom.
Yes.
Is people can see what's behind you. And Usha, can you tell us about the art that's behind you?
I'll be happy to. It's one of those rare things that my husband has found on a business trip and brought back. Typically, when he comes back with it, it just sits in storage because it doesn't meet with my approval. But this was something he brought back from Japan, and it's beautiful. It's actually kind of a 2-panel thing, which I don't know if people use as maybe like a curtain. I'm not sure. I love it because of the color, the composition. There's a rickshaw, which kind of reminds me of home in India. But it also kind of reminds me sometimes of this kind of communist propaganda art, like a certain vibe that it has. So I love it. I should probably kind of frame it and mount it so it brings out the best in it. But thank you. So it's just something that my husband found in his travels.
Well, and I feel a connection to it already. Dr. Doty, what have you got behind you?
Actually, that is a chest that was in a Tibetan monastery that was being destroyed, and it was saved. And as some of the listeners may know, the Dalai Lama is actually the founding benefactor of the work I do at Stanford related to compassion, and I was chairman of the Dalai Lama Foundation for many years. So I have this connection to Buddhism, although I'm not a Buddhist. But so this was actually used to contain holy objects related to Tantric Buddhism, actually. And it's about 120 years old. And it's now, for good or bad, it's filled with liquor now. So
some days that's for good.
And in fact, with COVID, it's almost empty.
Yeah, I find I go into a Zen state when I consume alcohol. So.
And I can see Dr. Cody's got a bike behind her, it looks like. A couple of bikes back there.
As far as being adaptable, I am in my garage because there's too much going on in my home. So that my artwork is hanging bikes.
Well, that's healthy artwork. So it's time for our last question. And it's actually, since I'm the MC, I'm going to make it a 2-part question. That living in this disconnected time of COVID, what have you learned about yourself, and what hopeful message can you leave our audience with tonight? So why don't we start with Dr. Cody? I'm just going alphabetically. So we'll start with you. What have you learned about yourself, and what's your hopeful message for our audience?
Well, I mean, I think in many ways, I don't know if I quite made this clear. My experience during COVID has been extraordinarily different than just about everybody else I know, because everybody else is thinking about what is it like to slow down and spend a lot of time alone, or spend a lot of time with just a few people and not have all of the hum of social connection. And I've actually had the opposite experience, where I have been moving faster and working harder with more different people and like with them than I ever have in my life. So I think, wow, I would love to just lay under a tree with a book, for about a month or maybe 6. So I've certainly learned a lot about myself during the pandemic, but I think it has more to do with, I'm actually a very introverted person. I like to go slowly. I like to think for a long time. And I've not been able to go slow or think for a long time. And I've had to talk to a lot of people and put myself out there. So that's been a real growth experience. And I guess what I've learned is that I can do it. It does, it's not comfortable, but I'm getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, which I think is a useful learning that I can take forward. As far as something hopeful, I just always want to remind myself and everyone that I'm with that we haven't experienced something like this in 100 years. And so, of course, we don't have it figured out. Of course, it's difficult. This hasn't happened in 100 years. And I think everyone has commented on, that to the extent that we can be compassionate with ourselves and sort of cut ourselves a little slack, the better off we'll be. So thank you again.
Pretty hopeful. Thank you. Dr. Doty, what have you learned and what's your hopeful message?
Well, I've been fortunate in some ways because I've been anchored by a meditation practice, which allows me to, I believe, be more resilient and not respond to sort of these oftentimes. Although, I can revert to that, but really, I think the key is to be kind to yourself. The very nature of being kind to yourself allows you to be kind to others. And also, as has been mentioned a number of times, having gratitude. And there's a huge body of evidence that when you have gratitude, even doing a gratitude journal where you just write down 3 things that you are grateful for each day, has a huge, huge impact on your mental health, because you see, it forces you to actually look at the positive and not get lost in the negative. And I think that's really the key. And also, as has been pointed out too, is the fact that in the face of all that is bad about the pandemic, we've also seen extraordinary resilience and extraordinary act by others to help. And I think that just shows you, frankly, the nature that we all have in ourselves, which is to proceed forward, to be helpful, and by doing so, change people's lives and ultimately changing your own life.
That's a great thought. Usha.
Yeah. So for me, I think my personality has always been, setting yourself goals, husbanding all the resources you need to achieve them and just going out there and getting it. And I've always felt like the output is something I control. And the better my inputs are, the better the output. And I think COVID especially has made it so obvious how fragile things are. This kind of illusion of you being in control and controlling your destiny is just so flawed. I kind of realized, and in some ways, it also, the suffering and the magnitude of this pandemic has also made me more humble about my own pursuits and my, how big my life is in the grand scheme of things, or rather how small it is. And so it's helped kind of, it's been an awakening to me. And you would think that somebody at my age has already had a couple of these episodes, so I would be humble, but the scale of the pandemic, I think, and the suffering around me has really made me realize that really, we are just like rudderless boats in the ocean to some extent. We may kind of feel like we have a lot of control, but we don't. And so moving forward, what I hope to do is to certainly still aspire to great things and still kind of practice excellence and do all of that, but also be humble and to some extent accepting of the universe and its ways, and not take myself so seriously, and so hopefully that perspective will last. There is the saying in the Hindu and Buddhist tradition, it's called smashana vairagyam. When somebody dies, especially in Hindus, they usually the body is taken to the cremation grounds and cremated right away. And usually women don't go, it's the men that go there. But there is a certain kind of aha moment that the people that attend the funeral experience when the body is just right in front of their eyes, turns to ash. Kind of like a moment of clarity that comes from that, about the kind of how mortal we are, how fragile life is. Unfortunately, that does not last very long. It usually, you come back home and the next day you're back getting caught and wrapped around the axle about the most trivial things. But I hope that this pandemic will kind of give me more lasting perspective, give us all more lasting perspective. Mm-hmm.
Well, I do think it will give us all more lasting perspective. And Dr. Cody, when you're ready to sit and read those books, Silicon Valley Reads has selected 6 of them this year. And you can start with Dr. Morthy's book if you haven't read it yet. and we have other books about music and animals and all sorts of ways people are connecting. I'd like to thank the three of you for joining us tonight to kick off our season of programming. I think it's a really important thing for people to hear from you and understand the way that we can be together even while we're apart. So now I'm going to turn it back over to our friends at the Commonwealth Club, who are going to play our closing message from Santa Clara County Librarian Jennifer Weeks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I am Jennifer Weeks, County Librarian for the Santa Clara County Library District and co-chair of Silicon Valley Reads. I hope you enjoyed this opening event. Thank you to our panelists, moderator, our generous donors, and to all of you who Zoomed with us this evening. This is only the beginning of this year's exciting program focused on positive connections with more than 100 free events throughout February and March. Silicon Valley Reads relies on community and individual donations to be able to offer outstanding events just like this one. We are proud that all of our programs are offered free of charge, and this is only possible with your support. We invite you to visit the website to contribute to this important program and view the full list of upcoming events at siliconvalleyreads.org. Thank you, and we look forward to connecting with you again soon.